Doctor the Gemara. We're up to Rav Meir Omer, Kol HaSeirim Kaparosan Shava. So Rav Meir held, not like Rav Yehuda in the Mishnah, that every carbon is earmarked for a specific Avera. Rather, all of the Seirim, except for the Sira Nasa B'fnim, which is made for someone who had Yediyah B'tchila and not Yediyah B'soif. Besides that, all the other Seirim come for all the same Averas, which is Yediyah B'soif and no Yediyah B'tchila, and no Yediyah B'tchila or B'soif. All the different Averas of Tumash, Mikdash, V'Kadoshav would be covered under all this here. Amar Rab Chama bar Rab Chanina, my time in Rab Meir. How does Rab Meir know this halacha? So often the first one listed off is the Seir Chodesh, and there it just says Seir. Following that, the Torah lists off the Musafim of all the Yom Tovim, and by every Yom Tov it uses the word Useir, sort of to connect it to the Seir Shorosh Chodesh. So we learned that Hukshu Kol HaSeirim Zeloseh, all of the Seirim of Rosh Chodesh and of Yom Tovim are all Hukush Zebazeh. Therefore, why? Because Vav Moisef al Inyan Rishon. The Vav of Useir connects each and every one of the Musafim to the one before it, and therefore to the one after it as well, because of the Vav of the next one as well. So everything is connected to each other. So at first glance, we thought that what Rav Chama means to teach us is Kol Chad V'Chad Mechavrei Gomar. Every single Musafim could learn from the other one. In other words, what A learns from B through the Seir, B will then transmit to C. So let's have a look at Rashi. Rashi lays it out very nicely on the fourth line from the top. The first Yom Tov mentioned after the Torah discusses Chodesh, Gomar Merosh Chodesh. You'll learn Pesach, the Seir that's brought on Pesach, from the Seir that's brought on Rosh Chodesh. The Chaper Alator Shachal Satame, to teach us that just like the Seir Rosh Chodesh is Mechaper on the Adam Tar that ate Basar Tamei, so too the carbon of Pesach will do the same thing. Ubrosh Chodesh Fir Reb Meir Reb Shimon. And as far as what the Seir Rosh Chodesh is for, Reb Meir will agree with Reb Shimon that it's for a tar that ate kachim that's tummy. And then after Pesach comes Sukkot. V'sel Sukkot hasomuch l'shuyom Kippurim. I'm sorry. After Pesach comes Shavuous. After Shavuos comes Rosh Hashanah. Then Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot. So we're skipping V'sel Sukkot, and the Seir that's brought on Sukkot is near or right after the Seir that's mentioned on Yom Kippurim. Hasomuch l'shuyom Kippurim. Gomar midiyom Kippurim. We will learn it from Yom Kippur. L'she'ein bo yediyah b'tchila. We know the Sira Nasa B'chutz is ein bo yediyah b'tchila, avol yesh bo yediyah b'soif. So now we know that just like the Sira of Yom Kippur is mechaper for that, so too will the Sira of Sukkot be mechaper for that. And then v'shal yom Kippurim mishal Sukkot. Sukkot will also provide a reciprocal limud back to Yom Kippurim. La'ein bo yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif. When there's no yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif. V'hader gamri kulu kol chad v'chad midasamuchle. And then everyone will share its own information. El yoinim b'tachtonim v'tachtonim el yoinim. So everyone's learning and teaching through this hekesh of Seir. So frag the Gemara, if that's the mechanics of how Reb Chama understands, how Reb Meir is transmitting all of the different kaparas that all of the different karbanas have to be shared with everything else, well, then we have another problem. Because the Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Kol HaTorah Kula, and we have to look at the Aleph because he cleans it up a little bit. Kol Bichol HaTorah Kula, Lamedin Lamed, Milamed, Chuch Mikachim. Everywhere else, if you learn something from a hekesh, that thing that you learned from the hekesh, you could now transmit to another halacha through a hekesh. Chutz mikachim, but kachim does not allow that. she'ein l'meidin lamed milamed. If the makar of a certain halacha comes from a hekesh, it cannot transmit that halacha to another halacha. So therefore, this mechanics that we have a havamina to understand Reb Chana bar Chanina, that kosol kadai kol chad v'chad mechavrei gomar, every one of these musafin teach and learn and are passing information through, for kachim it wouldn't work. So therefore, zok to Gemara, haloi kasha. Therefore, we're not going to learn like that. Rather, we're going to say kulu mikama gamri. There's a whole bunch of halachas that we know that exists by each one of the musafim, and each one of those musafim transmitted to all the other musafim. Kulu mikama gamri. Zokt Rashi. What does it mean? Kulu mikama gamri. Zokt Rashi. Kulu mirash chodesh gamri. All of the other musafim learn halacha from Rosh Chodesh, directly from Rosh Chodesh, directly from the source. And what halacha is that? L'tahar sha'achal l'satome. A tahar person who ate kachim that's tummy. V'Rosh Chodesh minayu, and Rosh Chodesh could learn directly from the source a different halacha. L'she'ein v'yidiyah klal. If there was no yidiyah, Rosh Chodesh could learn that from them. So now nobody is actually importing a halacha through a hekesh and then passing it along to something else with hekesh. Rather, each makar will transmit all of its information, original information, to all the other musafim. And they could all learn from Yom Kippurim. And Yom Kippur could learn directly from the other musafim. So Kum D'Chayis, we're not being forced to learn and transmit. Rather, there's a source for Ein B'Yidiyah Lo B'Tchila V'Lo B'Sayf, which is the regalim. There's a source for someone tahar who ate kachim that's tamei, which is Rosh Chodesh, and there's a source for Ein B'Yidiyah B'Tchila V'Yesh B'Yidiyah B'Sayf, which is the Sir Anasa B'Chut and Yom Kippur. Those are the three sources, and each one of these three sources transmit their information to all the other musafim, so it's a direct one-way limud through the hekesh, which is exactly what you could do in a situation of hekesh. Gewaltig. Zog to Gemara. Kulu mikama gamri. Zog to Tenech kol the kosev bay useir. All of the seirim in Parshas Pinchas that use the word useir with a vav, they could be part of the hekesh, because it's that vav that says, connect me to the others. But the problem is, there are two musafin where it doesn't say useir, it says plain seir. Useir atzeres, and v'yom kippurim. So, teinech kol the kosev v'seir kama. But atzeres v'yom kippurim, the likes of v'seir. Minolam, how are they going to be connected to the group to teach and learn what we need to know from them? Ella Amar Rav Yoina Amar Kra Eila Tasu Lashem B'Moyadechem. We're comparing all of the musafim, because at the end the pasuk rounds it all up. Eila Tasu Lashem B'Moyadechem Hugshu Kol Ha'Mayadem Kulum Zeloseh. So it's no longer the seir useir. It's because they're all hookish to each other, because it says Eila Tasu Lashem B'Moyadechem. Looking at it, it all becomes more real to me. So let's quickly take a peek in Parshas Pinchas just to see how the musafim are laid out. And then it sort of becomes a little bit more clear. So the Torah starts in Bamidbar Pinchas Perek Chav Ches. This is in the introduction to the Sirish Chodesh. It's starting with the Talmud, and then it says V'Roshei Chatshechem. Takriv L'Oil Hashem, and the last pasuk that we learn in Rosh Chodesh, it says U Seir Izim Echad Lachatos L'Hashem Al Oil Satamid Yosy V'Niska. So by the Oil of Rosh Chodesh, it says U Seir, connecting it to the group. Then it talks about Pesach. By Pesach, again, when we get up to Seir, list of all the kabbonis. Now, when we get up to the Seir, it says Useir chatos echad lechaper aleichem. Okay, then let's go to Shavuos. If you remember, Shavuos, the Gemara said, Atzeres, it does not say Useir. Because if we look at the end of the parish, it says Seir Izamecha. So there's no vav there. We lost connection. Let me see if I can get it again. It's very sketchy, this thing. I think this is losing internet. Let's see if we can get onto it quickly. Okay, and then so that's why Shavuos. Then the Torah goes on to Rosh Hashanah. By Rosh Hashanah, it also says Useir, so that joins it, and then it gets onto Sukkos. Now here's Sukkos. By Sukkos, every day it's Useir. Sukkos every day is Useir. So Sukkos we have Useir. The only day that we don't have Useir is Yom Kippur and Shavuos. So for that, the Gemara tells us. That it's the Eila Tasval Hashem B'Moedechem, which rounds everything up. Oh, let's look at that pasuk inside as well. The pasuk says at the end of the parsha of the Mayadim, the Torah rounds everything off and says all the way within the parsha Pinchas, Eila Tasval Hashem B'Moedechem Levad Minidrechem V'Nidvasechem Lo'Elisechem V'Luminchaysechem. So that's makish, all of the employed to each other to tell us that whatever the seir of anyone is mechaper for, all of them will be mechaper for that. Let me try one more time to get this connected. Dr. Gemara weiter. Fact Gemara Barish Chodesh Lav Moyidu. Barish Chodesh is not a moyed. So if you're relying on the Eila Tasul Hashem B'Moyadechem to connect all of the Seirim, how does it connect Rish Chodesh? Rish Chodesh is not a Yom Tov. Dr. Gemara Ivra. As a matter of fact, it is Rish Chodesh Nami Ikri Moyed. Rish Chodesh is also called a moyed. The Amar Abaye, like Abaye once taught us. The Amar Abaye, the year that the Meraglim were sent out was the second year that Klal Yisrael was in the Midbar. And that year, Tammuz Ahi Shata Miluya Milyuhu. Tammuz had 30 days. Although Tammuz normally has 29 days, that year, Tammuz had 30 days. Dichsiv Kara Alaymayid Lishbar Bachurai. Hashem adjusted the Moyed. He adjusted the day of Rosh Chodesh, which is referred to with the word Moyed, to destroy my Bochrim, to destroy everybody. And how does that work out? So Rashi tells us that if Tammuz was 30 days, and they went up on the 28th day, they went to Eretz Yisrael, the Meraglim went on the 29th day of Sivan, that means the 30 days of Tammuz were 30 days. We know they went up on the 29th day of Sivan, which will be 31 days. 31 plus 9 makes 40, right? They were there for 40 days. So it says when they came back at the end of the day, the 8th of Av, and that night they were crying. It only works out that they came home on the 8th day of Av, if in fact Tammuz was Moleh. So actually, Sivan was Moleh as well. So you had day 29 and 30, plus you had 30 days of Tammuz, which is now 32 days, and 32 plus 8 makes 40, which means they came down at the end of the 8th day of Av, and that night, which was the night of Tisha B'Av, is when they cried, and that's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, since you're crying for nothing now, I'm going to establish tonight as a night of Bechila Doris, and that's when the Beis HaMikdash was chayav. But as an aside, the pasuk refers to Rosh Chodesh as Moyed, Lishbar Bechori. It's interesting because we learned that Tisha B'Av, we don't say Tachnun to Yom Tov because Kara Laimoid is referring to Tisha B'Av. But Rashi says, and the Gemara is saying here, it's actually referring to Rosh Chodesh of Av, which was a day late, because Tammuz, Hashem made Molay into 30 days so that it should work out that the Meraglim will return on Erev Tisha B'Av. So if we bought Rosh Chodesh is also Yom Tov, it's included in the Hekesh of Eila Tasul Hashem, the Moyadech. Gewaltig. Am Rabbi Yochanan, the Moeder Reb Meir, Besir Hanasa Befnim, even Reb Meir agrees, although all of these are equal on all of different Chayim, that does not include the Sir Hanasa Befnim. The Sir Hashem was exclusive, Shehu Eine Mechaper Kaparason, it will not be Mechaper on all of the items in the list, and it's really 3 items. A is Yediyah Besoif and no Yediyah Betchila, that the Sir Hanasa Befnim will not touch. B is a Tahar that ate Kachim the Tameh, that the Sir Hanasa Befnim will not touch, and Ein Yediyah, not Betchila, not Besoif, that the Sir Hanasa Befnim will not touch. The Hein Einon Mechaper Kaparosoi, and all the other Seirim, which is the Sir Hanasa Bechutz, the Sir Chodesh, and the Sir Regalim, will not be able to be Mechaper someone who had Yediyah Betchila, but not Yediyah Besoif. So therefore, who Ein Mechaper Kaparoson? How do we know that the Sir Hanasa Befnim will not be able to be mechaper on what the other Seirim are mechaper? Because it says Kapar Achas Mechaper Ve'en Mechaper Shtei Kaparos. Where did it say this? It says this at the end of Parshas Tetzaveh, when the Torah is telling us about the Aron. We had this earlier. It says V'chiper Aharon al Karnoisov. I think this is the last pasuk in Parshas Tetzaveh. V'chiper Aharon al Karnoisov Achas Bashana. So there's 2 achas bashanas. The first one is important to note, is actually not talking about the carbon, rather it's talking about the mizbeach. The kippur iron al karnois of achas bashana. The mizbeach could only be mechaper this once a year, and then it says midam chatas hakipurim achas bashana, referring to the carbon. And we're going to soon see that that distinction is critical. So let's have a look over here. It says Achas. Why? Kapar Achas Mechaper, the Einoi Mechaper Shtei Kaparas. The Sir Hanasa Befnim is exclusive. It's only Mechaper on one Avera. What Avera is that? That is Yediyah Betchila, but no Yediyah Besoif. And Hein Einon Mechaper Kaparosoi, and all of the other Sirim cannot be Mechaper for that, because Amar Kra Achas Bashana. That's the second Achas in the pasuk. Achas Bashana. Kaparazu loy sehei ela achas b'shana. The kapara of Yediyah Betchila, but no Yediyah Besoif, that's offered only once a year, and that's an exclusive kapara to the Sir Hanasa Bifnim. Okay, Gewaltig. Zog the Gemara, Tanya Nam Hochi. We have a brayso that supports what we're saying. Sharon Reb Meir. Al she'ein bo Yediyah loy Betchila v'loy Besoif. V'al she'ein bo Yediyah Betchila aval yesh bo Yediyah Besoif. V'al tahar she'achalos hatomei. All these 3 averis are equally nischaper with all of the seirim. Seirei haragolim, v'sir Rosh Chadoshim, v'sir hanasa b'chutz mechaprim divrei Reb Meir, exactly like what the Gemara just explained. But the ilu sir hanasa b'fnim, that's not part of this group. Shiyorei, the brayso left that out because that's exclusive. It will not be mechaper on those averis, and those karbanos will not be mechaper on the aver that's exclusive for the sir hanasa b'fnim, which is yesh lo yediyah betchila vein yediyah b'soif, the kabaros nami shayra. So the seir can take care of those items, and those karbanos will not take care of the avera that the seir is designated for. Haya Rab Shimon Omer. Rab Shimon said, "Seirei Rosh Chadoshim mechaprin al tahar she'achal esatam." Now, if we go back to the Mishnah, we will see that it was a buildup. The Seir Chadoshim could do the least; it could only do tahar she'achal esatam. The Seir Regalim can do that, plus the Seir of the Yom Tovim can also do ein lo yediyah loy b'tchila loy b'soif, and then the Sir Hanasa b'chutz can do all 3. It could do sai tar shachos atame, sai ein yediyah b'fnim b'tchila and ein yediyah b'soif, and yesh and ein yedi b'tchila v'yesh yedi b'soif. It can do all three things. So this is a little bit different, like the shita of Reb Meir. Reb Meir said everything could do everything. Reb Shimon said the sir nasa b'chutz could do everything. The sir nasa by regalim could only do two things, and the sir of Rosh Chodesh could only do one thing. So the Gemara wants to understand why any limit that we're going to use, according to Reb Meir, went both ways, and everything shared. We want to know why it's only going to go one way. So Bishleima the Rosh Chadashim loy mechaper ad regalim. I could understand why the Sir of Rosh Chodesh, which is designated only for a Torah person that ate Kodesh and Stomach, but it will not be able to be mechaper on someone that did not have a Yediyah B'tchila or Yediyah B'soif. The Omar Kra Ovain, by the Sir of Rosh Chodesh, says Ovain, and it's singular, and we learned, like we learned yesterday, Ovain Echet Hu Noisei Ve'enoi Noisei Shnei Avoinos. The Sir of Rosh Chodesh can only be mechaper on one Aveira, not on two. The one Aveira is someone who is tahar that ate kodesh that's tummy. El de regalim, by the Sir regalim, there is no pasuk that limits what they could be mechaper. So therefore, nichapru ad rosh chadashim, let them be mechaper on that the rosh chadashim could be mechaper for. Zakti Gemara, Amar Kra Oisa. By the Sir of Rosh Chodesh says Oisa, only the Sir of Rosh Chodesh could be mechaper for a tar that ate kachim that's tamei. Oisa, no say avoin, vein acher no say avoin. But no other carbon will be able to take care of the avera of Rosh Chodesh. So tomorrow, b'shlama de regalim loy mechaper ad yom kippurim. So I'm actually making a little bit of a mistake, because here we're talking about exclusive, where each one is exclusive. So let's look back at the Mishnah just to get clarity on Beis Amud Beis to see what shita we are explaining over here. So if we go back to Beis Amud Beis, let's look. Shahir Shimon Aimer. Higher Rab Shimon Aimer, Rosh Chadashim mechaprim al atar shachos atame, v'shal regalim mechaprim al she'en bo yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif, v'shal yom kippur mechaper al she'en bo yediyah b'tchila al v'yesh ba yediyah b'soif. So for Keret, Rab Shimon said each one is exclusive, not like what I introduced this Gemara with, that it's a build-up. That's the Rab Shimon ben Yehuda, I remember Shmuel. But Rab Shimon himself is exclusive, and that is that the Sir Chodesh is only for a tahar person that ate kachim that's tamei. The seirim of all the Yom Tovim are only for loy the she'en b'yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif, and the Sir of Yom Kippurim, the Azazel, is only for ein b'yediyah b'tchila avayesh yediyah b'soif. So the Gemara wants to know, where do you see this exclusivity that each carbon is only earmarked for a specific aveira? So the Gemara said that Rosh Chadashim will not be mechaper on the golem because it's oven echad. It also says oisa by the Sir of Rosh Chodesh to tell us that it's only the Sir of Rosh Chodesh that could be mechaper on a tar that ate kachin but tomei. No other carbon could be mechaper for that. So that means the Sir of the regalim cannot be mechaper for the aveira that the Sir of Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for. It's only able to be mechaper for ein b'yediyah loy b'tchila and loy b'soif, and neither of them can touch Yom Kippur. So Zakimar Bishlam de regalim loy mechaper mad Yom Kippurim. I can understand why you would say that this year that's nasa b'regalim the musafim will not be mechaper. What Yom Kippur is mechaper on, meaning if it's ein b'yediyah b'tchila but yesh b'yediyah b'soif, that the regalim will not be able to be mechaper for. Why? Damakra achas bashana. Again, referring to that pasuk in Parshas Tetzaveh, where the Torah says achas bashana, kapara zu loy tehei ela achas bashana. The kapara that's offered by the seir from being mechaper on the same aveiros that the Sir Chodesh could be mechaper for, and what the seir of regalim why don't we say that the seer hachitzon hanasa b'chutz by Yom Kippur is also mechaper on the other two averos, meaning a tahar that ate kachim that's tamei, and ein ba yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soy. So with that, Omer Kra achas kapar achas mechaper the ein mechaper shtei kaparis. Again, it says achas to tell us that it's only this seir nasa b'chutz that could be mechaper on this avera. I'm sorry, the seir nasa b'chutz could only be mechaper on one avera, and it cannot be mechaper on other averas. So therefore, this exclusivity, each carbon is earmarked for a specific avera. Frank the Gemara, the problem is it does not say achas in reference to the seir nasa b'chutz. It says achas in reference to the seir nasa b'fnim. Achas b'seir nasa b'fnim u'dichsiv. How do you know? Let's look back to the pasuk in Parshas Tetzaveh. What does it say? V'chipar aharon al karnois of achas b'shana midam chatas hakipurim. That's not the seir azozel. You don't spritz the blood of the seir azozel on the mizbeach hapnimi. So therefore, clearly, this pasuk in Tetzaveh is not talking about the seir lazozel. It's only speaking about the seir lashem. We want to use this pasuk to tell us that the seir lazozel is exclusive to the avera of yesh yediyah b'tchila ve'ein yediyah. I'm sorry, ein yediyah b'tchila ve'yesh yediyah b'soif. Because of achas, this pasuk is not even talking about the seir nasa b'chutz. So we have a very big problem. The seir nasa b'chutz. Why can't it be mechaber on all of the other averis, and why can't the seir of the regolim be mechaper on the same aver that the seir nasa b'chutz is? This whole exclusivity that you're learning from achas and Parshas Tetzaveh is not talking about the seir nasa b'chutz. It's only talking about the seir nasa b'fnim. So for example, v'viksiv kiksiv achas v'seir nasa b'fnim u'dichsiv. And for the Gemara, Amar Kra, the pasuk says as follows. Turning on to Amud Beis, milvad chatas hakipurim. It says in the pasuk milvad chatas hakipurim. So let's see the lashon pasuk. Am I reading right? Yeah. Milvat chatas hakipurim. It says it brings it down in hay. So let's look at the pasuk. It says sir izim echod chatos milvad chatas hakipurim v'oilas hatomid uminchasam v'niskayim. So what do we learn from there? Zokt Rashi hachi perusha achas the sefer the kra, the achas in the sefer of the pasuk of Tetzaveh. So it says v'chiper Aaron al karnois of achas b'shana midam chatas hakipurim achas b'shana. So the second achas, Zokt Rashi, the mamatina mina, that achas we're using for exclusivity, she'ein achar mechaper kaparosoi, that no other carbon can provide the kapara that the seir of Yom Kippur is mechaper, is because the somech yichaper livashana. That's the limud, and that's from the second achas mashma leinami achitzoy. That is also referring to the chitzoy. So the Gemara's kasha was that pasuk is speaking about the seir nasa b'pnim, not the zozel. We're arguing that the second achas, which says that says that no other carbon could be mechaper, what the seir of Yom Kippur is mechaper, doesn't apply exclusively to the seir nasa b'fnim, and it also applies to the seir nasa b'chutz. We need to know why, because the pasuk is actually not speaking about the seir nasa b'chutz. So here is where Rashi explains the Gemara. The b'seir pnimi ksivpe. L'maisa, it's talking about the seir pnimi. K'dichsiv midam chatas hakipurim achas b'shana yichap, and the chatas hakipurim are clearly the karbonis that brought him. Zakrash chatas yom kipurim hanu par kohen gadol seir. So how do you see that this is talking about the seir nasa b'chutz as well? Zokt Rashi v'chivon de b'seir pnimi ksiv. Since it's talking about the seir pnimi, v'chitzon iskish lepnimi. Here's the main point. The point is there's a hekesh that compares the seir lashem to the seir lazozel, and therefore whatever the Torah reveals applies to the seir nasa b'pnim, we're also going to apply to the seer that's nasa b'chutz. So therefore, the bal v'chitzon iskos lepnimi darshini nami yachitzon she'ein acher mechaber kaparosai. So the second achas in the pasuk tells us that the sira nasa b'pnim is the only carbon that's going to be mechaper. If it's yesh yudi b'tchila and then yudi b'soif, we're going to pass that on through the hekesh to the sira nasa b'chutz, and the sira nasa b'chutz will be the only carbon that could be mechaper if there's no yudi b'tchila, but there is yudi b'soif. Now that's the one-way exclusivity, meaning that the sira nasa b'chutz has the exclusive koyach to be mechaper if there is no yudiyah b'tchila, but yesh yudiyah b'soif. But what about the other way around? Maybe the seer of Yom Kippur should be able to be mechaper on the other averos. That you need the achas of the reisha to teach you. Now you might say the same way the achas of the seifa applies equally to the sira nasa b'fnim as it applies to the sira nasa b'chutz. You cannot make that same argument for the achas or the reisha. Why? So Rashi have achas the reisha the kra the darshina minei the hu eina mechaper kaparas acherim. The achas in the first part of the pasuk, which is where we learn that the sira nasa b'fnim cannot be mechaper on any other averos other than the aver that it was designated for, which is yesh yidiyah b'tchila v'loy b'soif loy midah shachitzay. That you don't have a hekesh to say that concept applies equally to the sira chitzay. You know why? Because the achas in the reisha of the pasuk is not talking about a seir at all. It's talking about the mizbeach. The lav b'sir ksiv ela b'mizbeach ksiv, because the lashon pasuk is v'chipa aron al karnoisov shel mizbeach hapnimi achas. It's the mizbeach we're talking about. There is no hekesh to the sira chitzay. Hilchach sira chitzay and leimimit me'acha. It has no connection to the first achas. The lav l'mizbeach is. Surely the sira chiton might be hukash to the sira pnimi, but it's not hukash to the mizbeach itself. So now, if we look at this pasuk with a whole new light, it says v'chipa aron al karnoisov. When we're talking about the mizbeach has exclusivity achas bashana. It can only do this particular avera, which is yidiyah b'tchila and not yidiyah b'soif. B'dam chadas hakipurim achas bashana tells us, the second achas tells us that no other carbon could be mechaper for this. So this second achas we can also apply to the sira nasa b'chitzoin, that no other carbon could be mechaper for what the sira nasa b'chutz is mechaper for, meaning the sira of Rosh Chodesh and the sira of the regalim will not be able to be mechaper on a case where there was no yediyah b'tchila, but there was yediyah b'soif. That's exclusive to the sira nasa b'chutz. So let's go back to the Gemara. And through that, we're makish all of the karbonos on Yom Kippur, so we can apply the halacha that we know by the sira nasa b'pnim, that it's the only seir that could be mechaper on its exclusive avera. So too, the sira nasa b'chutz can only be mechaper on its aver. Gewaltig. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Mishmai. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda argues on how we understood Reb Shimon. So Reb Shimon clearly says that each avera is earmarked exclusive to each carbon, meaning the sira chodesh can only be mechaper on someone tor who ate kachim that was tamei. The sira regalim is the only carbon that could be mechaper on ein yediyah loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif, and the sira nasa b'chutz on Yom Kippur is the only carbon that could be mechaper on ein yediyah b'tchila avol yesh yediyah b'soif. But Reb Shimon ben Yehuda came and said differently. It's a build-up. The sira chodesh is the lowest level. That can only be mechaper on someone tahar who ate kachim that's tamei. But the sira nasa regalim can do whatever the sira nasa chodesh can do. Plus, it can also do ein yediyah b'tchila and ein yediyah b'soif, and then it's a further build-up. And the sira nasa b'chutz on Yom Kippur can do all those. Plus, it can also do ein yediyah b'tchila v'yesh yediyah b'soif. So it's like the bronze package, the silver package, and the gold package. The Rosh Chodesh could do the least amount, and then the Regalim could do whatever the Rosh Chodesh could do, and then some, and the Yom Kippur could do all that those could do, and then some. The Amar Kra, where does he know this from? Avain. We learn about the Sirah Chodesh. Avain Echad Hu Noisei Ve'ene Noisei. That's how we know Sirah Chodesh. One there, someone tahar with kachim that's tummy. The Regalim Nami Loi Nichperu Ad Rosh Chadashim. Frag the Gemara, based on your limud, we already had a limud to say exclusivity, so that the Sirah Regalim should not be able to be mechaper for the Aveira that Rosh Chodesh does. The Omerka Oisa, by the Sirah Chodesh says Oisa, meaning Oisa who noise Avain, Veinacher noise Avain. Right? We had that limud that the only carbon that could be mechaper on the Aveira that Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for is the Sirah Chodesh, no other one. Right? We had that drasha just a moment ago, Namar Aleph. Dr. Gemara, Reb Shimon ben Yehuda actually argues, and he holds Oisa loy mashmalei. We learned up until now that Oisa implies exclusivity, that the only carbon that could be mechaper for a tar that ate kodesh tamei is a Sirah Chodesh. He holds Oisa does not demonstrate that exclusivity. Okay, so let's go weiter. Ma'isna de regalim the loy mechaper ad Yom Kippurim. The Sirah Regalim will not be able to be mechaper for what the Sirah Yom Kippur is, meaning it will not be able to be mechaper for ein yidiyah b'tchila v'yesh yidiyah b'sayid. How do we know? The Amar Kra achas b'shana. We had the pasuk in Tetzava v'achas b'shana that gives exclusivity to even the Sirah Nasa b'chutz, because we said it's hukash to the Sirah Nasa b'fnim. Kaparazu loy te el achas b'shana. But ihachi the Yom Kippur nami loy nichpur ad regalim. Why don't we say that the seir that's brought on Yom Kippur should not be able to be mechaper on the averes that the seir regalim and the seir of Rosh Chodesh are mechaper, because it says achas as well. Now we just learned a moment ago in Rashi that achas doesn't apply to the seir nasa b'chutz, because that's talking about the mizbeach. Where did Rashi get that from? From right here, from this Gemara. So Yachid Yom Kippur Nami Nichbur ad regalim achas ksiv kapor achas mechaper vein mechaper shtei kaporos. There's an achas that says that the Sirah Panimi of Yom Kippur cannot be mechaper on any other averes, and we should apply that to the Sirah Chitzon through the Hekish. Zok to Gemara, achas loy mashmalei. He holds that achas doesn't teach us anything. Amai, why would you say that? The chiksiv achas b'seir anasa b'fnim ksiv. Is it because the word achas you cannot apply to the Sirah nasa b'chutz? You could only apply it to the Sirah nasa b'fnim? If that's the case, then what about the second achas that we said does apply to the Sirah nasa b'chutz? Yochi d'regalim nami nichbur ad Yom Kippurim. The chiksiv achas, when it says the second achas, it's also only referring to the Seir hanasa b'fnim ksiv. Zokt Gemara, there's a distinction. Lo'ilam achas mashmalei. Sure, you have a good raya from achas that there is exclusivity, but only one of the achases can we apply to the Sirah nasa b'chutz. V'shayni yachad amar kra v'chipa arna al karnois of achas b'shana. The achas is not applying to the Sirah nasa b'fnim. The achas is referring to the mizbeach. Karnois of the mizbeach hapnimi. Hu de kapor achas mechaper ve'ne mechaper shtei kaporos. It's only the zrikas on the mizbeach hapnimi that could only be mechaper on its exclusive avera, which happens to be yidiyah b'tchila avo ein yidiyah b'soif. But ha de chitzon, the Sirah nasa b'chitzon, doesn't have that exclusivity, and therefore it could be mechaper not only on its avera but also on the avera of regalim, also on the avera of Rosh Chodesh. Afilu shtei kaparos. So basically, there's two achases. One is to tell you that no other carbon could be mechaper what the Sirah nasa b'chutz could be mechaper for. That achas we have. But the other achas that says that the Sirah of Yom Kippur cannot be mechaper for anything else, that achas only applies to the Sirah nasa b'fnim, but it doesn't apply to the Sirah nasa b'chutz. Amar ulam Rabbi Yochanan, Tamidim shaloi hutzruchu l'tzibur. Now the halacha was there had to be a steady supply of proper carbonis that could be used for the carbon tumid. there had to be a 3-day supply always lined up. How many karbanos do they need for the Tamid a day? 2. Because they needed 2, the way they had this system work was they had a lishka where they always had 6 animals that were ready to go. And every day they would take 2 animals out, one for the Tamid Shel Shachar and one for the Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim, and every day they brought in a new set. So there was always 6 karbanos there, ready to go. Now what happens at the end of the period? Meaning, we know every Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they no longer buy their karbanos from the money that was for last year. Now they start using the money from this year to buy their karbanos. So here you have your lishka with 6 karbanos. There's 2 that get used on the last day, and there's 4 that don't get used. These 4 were paid for with the money of the last lishka. So what do you do with these animals? You cannot be makriv of them anymore in the next lishka, the next day, because they were paid for with the wrong money. And the karbanos that you have to use, starting from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, has to be karbanos that you paid for with the new money. So what do you do with them? Niftin tamimim. Even though these animals are tamim, normally a carbon you could only be paid if it has a mum. The chiddush is that these karbanos you can be paid to them, even though they don't have a mum. So basically, what you do is you'll take chulin, you'll be paid to these animals, right? Now this money belongs to the animals. Not animals are chulin. You can read them with the money of the new lishka. So that's how they would do it. So Yosef Rabba v'ka'amr la lahashmaitz. Rabba said over this halacha, in others from Ula said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that you have an anomaly where a carbon that has kedushas aguf, it's a carbon that never got a mum, you could still be pointed. Amalei Abchista, what you're saying is wrong. Man tzayich loch Ula Rabbi Yochanan Rabba. Who would listen to you, Ula, and who would listen to Rabbi Yochanan? What you're saying doesn't make sense. Why? These have a kedushas aguf. Memela, but the kabayis you could be pointed, but you can't just take kedushas aguf willy-nilly off a carbon. So how would this system work? Amr lay. So Rabbit had told back, what are you talking about? At loy tizbra. Would you not agree? The loy amrinan kedusha shaben lechan halcha. I'll prove to you that you also have to agree to this concept that sometimes you can be poided even something with kedushas aguf. And your argument of kedusha lechan halcha is not a valid argument. How can I prove it to you? Because what's not, we have a Mishnah that says Moshe Ketores. What about the Ketores? Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they have the same problem again. They now have to have Ketores that was paid for with the Trumas Alishka from the new year. So what do they do with the leftover Ketores? What would they do? So you know what they would do? What they would do is Mafrishan Mimena Schar HaUmnin Umechal Oisal Mois. What they did is they took money and they used this money to pay the umnin, right? They have to pay umnin to the family that made the Ketores. The name of that family was, I believe, Beis Haftinas, Rashi says. They have to be paid. So you would pay their salary with the money of the Lishka. The moment that money was given to the umnin, that money becomes chulin because it's transferred. They provide the labor, and the labor becomes kodesh, so to speak, and the money that they're paid becomes chulin. So now these kohanim, the Beis Haftinas, these people who made the Ketores have money that's chulin, but we don't give them that money. This cash that we want to pay them with, we don't give it to them. It now becomes chulin because it's the money that they're supposed to be paid. But before we give them this money, what we do is we use this money of chulin to redeem the Ketores for the leftover Ketores. Now what happens is the money takes on kedusha and the Ketores becomes chulin. We take this Ketores and we give it to the workers as their pay. So we don't pay them in cash. We pay them in Ketores. Now we take money from the Dulishka and we buy the Ketores back from those umnin. So now we were able to take off the kedusha from the last year and put on the new kedusha from the new shekel. So that's what they did. So they put on the mois omnin, they would give the ketores, the leftover ketores to the omnin, which now made the ketores chulin. So again, the Ketores is just like the carbon. And you, Rabbi Yochanan, I mean, you have this argument. You, Reb Chizda, have this argument. V'chi kedusha shebehen laheichad hocha. Ask the same question over here. How does this transaction work for the Ketores? V'amai name a kedusha shebehen laheichad hocha. Elamai, your argument is not a valid argument. So Reb Chizda says, what are you talking about? You're asking me if I'm Ketores? Ketores is not a kasha. Ketores is different. Ketores kamrin, shiny Ketores, the Kedushas dam. Ketores is not Kedushas aguf. Those karbanas are a problem. They're Kedushas aguf, they have Kedushas carbon. You can't just redeem them. But Ketores is not Kedushas aguf. Ketores is only Kedushas damim, and therefore you can't prove to me that my argument is not valid. From Ketores you can of course redeem because it's not Kedushas aguf. But the animals, I'm still going to ask you, how could you redeem them without any type of mum? Okay, we'll stop here, and tomorrow we're going to delve into, is Ketores Kedushas Damim, or is it Kedushas Aguf? And that's going to be a whole discussion. A little bit complicated. I think